So now on to the actual topic. You are here today to discover about smart homes. What is a smart home? When you have energy storage in your home, which could be a battery for electricity or a heat store to store heat, you have flexibility as to when you take your power from the grid. And depending on, you can choose when to export it. So being smart means optimizing how this happens, when this happens. You can do it in different ways. You can try to minimize costs, or you can minimize carbon emissions, or maybe there's something else I haven't thought of. And there are lots of ways as to how to do it. So we've got Samin and we've got Andy, who are going to demonstrate and talk about some different approaches that they're involved with. Both of them are open eco homes as well, open eco home hosts as well. Samin was a host a few years ago, and you may have seen Andy's tour that was, I think it was last week. So Samin, would you like to go first?
I can go first, thank you. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so smart electric homes. So kind of I've subtitled this mostly off the shelf, because pretty much everything we've done hasn't really involved us, kind of rolling our sleeves up and writing code or designing hardware or anything like that. You can kind of do it yourself, bit by bit. We kind of did it in a more destructive way, maybe, but all of this can be incrementally done and pretty much off the shelf, as in there are people out there, companies out there who will do each of these small bits for you. So, kind of be encouraged, you can do something like this. This talk is both Zoe, my wife, and I were going to give this talk, but she is now on football duty with our daughter, so she's not here. Okay, so this is what our house was like until April this year. This is kind of the basically the electricity, gas, energy flows between it. The title here, Victorian Family Home with 21st Century Installation, that's the title of our Open Eco Home tour. So if you search for that, that title, you'll find our tour, and there's our house kind of in the center of the page. So we had our house, it was a Victorian house. We had it completely kind of re-insulated, solar panels put in, and various things like that done. And until April this year, this is what it looked like. So we have a 4 kilowatt sun power solar array when the sun is shining, which even in the winter the sun shines. The solar panels capture energy and they feed it into the house first. And if the house doesn't need it, then it goes into via an iBoost into an immersion heater at the bottom of our hot water tank, our pressurized hot water tank, and it heats the water until the water doesn't need it anymore. And then again, if the house doesn't need it, then it's exported out into the grid. And on the usage side, the house obviously uses the hot water. So we're kind of using the hot water as a battery in a way, but the house basically takes from the grid until kind of early this year. What happened in around, actually it was before April, maybe kind of 3-6 months before April, we have our gas and electricity from a company called Bulb, and they've been trialing giving out batteries. Well, I don't think giving out, subsidizing batteries. So they were offering batteries of various sizes, and it was kind of a third off. So we ended up buying an Alpha Smile B3, a 2.9 kilowatt hour battery. And there you can see it, kind of, it's sitting outside in the garden, in the corner, behind the water butt. It's completely, kind of doesn't really interrupt anything in the house. It's something that's a component outside. It just needs wires, and you can see a white kind of a channel underneath the step in the doorway. You can see a white channel going into the house. And this was, kind of an offer from them. We took it up. They did everything. So process, kind of there's a title there, process. They did everything basically. They subcontracted to somebody who to the immerser, the battery kind of a dealership who subcontracted somebody to come and install it for us. It was pretty smooth, though actually we were the first, we were their first customer, so lots of kind of things took longer than they should have. But I think nowadays, I think if you are getting battery installed, it's pretty straightforward, really. So this was in April. Since April, this is what our house looks like. So basically, you know, there's the battery at the bottom now. So the way it works right now, as before, the sun is shining. You know, the house takes it if we need it. The immersion heater takes it if the house doesn't need it. And now, actually, this is slightly wrong. Actually, the battery charges first. The battery charges until the battery is full. Then it goes into the immersion heater. So this is kind of swapped a bit, sorry. And if the battery is full and the immersion heater doesn't need it, then it goes out into the grid. And what happens in the evening is that the house takes it from the battery. Otherwise, it takes it from the grid. So yeah, that's kind of the setup now. So I'm kind of intrigued by, you know, it's a good thing to do. I mean, you get a feeling in your, you know, somewhere in your gut that, oh, you know, I'm using my own electricity. I'm not exporting as much, maybe, or various things like that. But what does the data actually look like? So this is our electricity and gas usage and bills. So the axis, the blue is electricity, red is gas. The axis on the left is kilowatt hours of both electricity and gas. And the axis on the right is the cost. So actually, I just want to highlight kind of just a couple of things here. That first of all, in December 20, January 21, electricity, our kind of usage shoots up a bit. And as quite a lot of you still have fresh in your mind, that's when all this kind of a pandemic kicked off. So that's kind of a bit of another situation. You know, everybody was at home, we began using more things. You know, so it's much more, you know, you'd expect that anyway because of winter, right? So if you look at the previous 2 years, usage will have gone up in that time anyway, but not by this much. So there's kind of a, you know, bit of a conflating kind of a factor there. But basically, if you look since April 21 onwards, the electricity and gas we've been using has gone down a bit. Again, you know, there's lots of mixed things going on here. We have teenagers who, you know, turn all the lights on, leave all the lights on, or have, you know, 2-hour showers or whatever they do. So, you know, there's lots of things going on here. And because of COVID, of course, there's more usage. There's lots of things going on here. But generally, actually, electricity usage as used by us from the grid has gone down. And I was kind of intrigued by what was happening to our export into the grid. Oh, actually, let's go to that first. I was intrigued by what's happening to our export into the grid. And here you can see, because my hunch was that we would be exporting much less back into the grid. But actually, again, if you look at kind of the April number, April, June, July number, it's less, but only slightly so. And this kind of, you know, I kind of, we went for this 2.9 kilowatt hour battery, but now, you know, I'm kind of maybe regretting it a bit, thinking, oh, maybe I should have gotten a bigger one. But then would we have filled it up all the time? You know, it's kind of, you know, things to play with, basically. But basically here, if you look at June, July this year versus, so this is the export to the grid, versus June, July last year and the year before, we're exporting pretty much the same, slightly less, but generally pretty much the same. So let's go back to the slide. This is the battery app. The battery, you saw the battery, it's, you know, it's a box in the corner of the garden. It has Wi-Fi. It has actually both a Wi-Fi receiver and a transmitter. So it's connected to our network. There's an app. You can log into their website. You can get the same data as on your app. So I'll just very quickly sort of tell you about what the app shows. On the left-hand side is the home screen of the app. And the picture there with a battery in the middle in the daytime, when the sun is shining, or or actually doesn't really matter, even in the evening when the house is using electricity all the time, this is animated, right? So literally, somebody actually, Mark said this. Can you see the photo? You can see the photons going. Yes, you can. What it's showing is that top left, the PV panels. So this is, look at the time here in the center of the home screen, top center of the home screen. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The PV is generating, kind of just over 1,500 watts of electricity. The battery in the center is mainly full, so it's like 98% full nearly, but it's still being charged. So the left, on the left and bottom left of that animation is the battery. It's still being charged. Top right, we're not exporting anything to the grid right now because the house is using 1310 watts of electricity. And that is very likely at this point, I know, is the immersion heater kicking in and using stuff there. So, this kind of animates throughout the day. And actually, amusingly, when we had the battery for the first several weeks, I would just look at it nearly every day, well, many times a day. And our kids said to me, "Oh, Papa, it's like you've got an Xbox." And I'm not a game player, but yeah, it really was. You could really see what was happening in the house. Okay, so that's the home screen on the left. And then, of course, all this data is recorded. So the middle screen here shows power over the daytime, over this day, the 18th of September. Green is battery, so you can see the battery, kind of has a certain charge until 9 o'clock in the morning. When it starts charging, reaches kind of nearly 100%. What else? Load. The blue one up loads from the house, so you can see their peaks. They're kind of points in the house when we're using a lot of electricity, maybe breakfast time, dinner time, boiling the kettle, various things like that. But also at times the house doesn't need any more. So the red spikes there are showing us exporting back into the grid. On the right-hand side, the screenshot on the right-hand side is just all that wrapped up over a day. So all that kind of data wrapped up over a day. And it's nice to see that headline number at the top, kind of 90% self-consumption and 71% efficiency. So it's nice to kind of, know that that we're kind of we're using what we generate, right? Okay, so we've seen this already. Yeah, so basically last slide. So I think my experience for this is pretty good. Having a kind of whatever you want to call a smart home, but there's PV, there's battery, there's other kind of more low-tech things like an immersion heater in your hot water tank, but all of these are hooked up. And I can more importantly, maybe for me, maybe not for you, but maybe this will be true for all of you as well. I can see what's happening, right? I can see the data. I think the monthly bill that I get from my utility supplier is really too gross. I can't really see what's happening. I want to see what's happening during the daytime. It leads to some interesting kind of questions that you can ask yourself. The sun is shining. Should I put the washing machine on, or should I charge the battery instead? So various things like that. So things that you wouldn't have thought of before, or things maybe if you were an old style economy 7 type thing where you would run the washing machine in the night. Those kind of questions come up now again. So the bulb tariff that we're on is just a very simple one, and that's kind of one advantage of it. What you're getting, but now they kind of these very local decisions I can make about what to turn on, what to turn off, and when to do that. Yeah, so the just kind of just some niggles really. Be nice to have more data. So one data item I miss, what ought to get automatically is the data from the immersion heater. So it's got a display, but I know what to do to get data off it. I just haven't done it. So as I said, it's kind of off the shelf. So everything I've got right now is done by somebody else. So annoyingly, the battery app It doesn't allow me to download the data. So I had to ask our suppliers to give me a data dump that I cleaned up, and that's what I used to show the graphs. Yeah, and then, something I already talked about, sort of the bulb tariffs is a simple one, but if you were to move to something more complicated, and Andy, I know we'll talk about this a bit, like Octopus Agile, where the price changes every half an hour, then all these things become slightly more complicated. Also interesting, kind of, but also more complicated. And actually, you could be even more efficient. You could be more, kind of eco-friendly with your house. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Samin. It's really great to hear what you can do with a reasonable amount of flexibility and completely off-the-shelf stuff, and also to hear what's wrong with it as well, because we always want to know what to look out for. Now we're going to hear from Andy. Do continue to ask questions, but we're going to have most of the questions at the end. I should have said that before. So if it's something that needs clarification, let us know. But by and large, we expect to have most of the questions at the end. So Andy's going to talk now for 20 minutes or so. What have I got to say about Andy? Many of you know Andy through his business, because he has a business called Some Energy. Doesn't do retail anymore, but he installed my PV panels about 10 years ago. And he knows everything there is to know about renewable energy, especially on boats. So Andy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Yeah, so as Nicola says, I do have a home that was featured in Open Eco Homes, and which is fully electric. So I can talk from that point of view. But this, the slides I'm showing are actually much more from the perspective of the bits and pieces that you can buy or have installed to turn your home into a smart electric home, which obviously I know from my day job. So let me just share the screen. Hopefully this will work. Yeah, so the smart electric home using energy intelligently. I've got a slightly different definition to Nicola, because mine is a building where decisions on the use of electrical power are made autonomously. You could make decisions on when to use electrical power yourself, and humans are good at some aspects of knowing what's going to happen in the future. So whether you need to have hot water in the morning or not. But a lot of the decisions you need to make might be in the middle of the night if a tariff, time of use tariff is particularly low, or as clouds go behind the in front of the sun and stop your PV producing so much. So we're really talking about devices that have some sort of silicon brain, a computer or a microcontroller in them that can actually make those decisions on where the electricity is going on a sort of second-to-second basis. And it's worth pointing out that we use electricity at the moment for lights, TV, computers. You'll be using it a bit at the moment for watching this. In the future, we're going to use a lot more because our cars are going electric, and there's an opportunity there because you don't have to charge at any particular time of day. You just need a certain amount of charge next time you need the car. So there's a real opportunity there to sort of shift your usage. And heating as well is going to be largely moved to heat pumps, and there's some opportunity there to choose exactly when you're heating as well. So there's a lot of opportunities coming up to use devices to use that electricity smartly. Again, why? And I think this is really what Nicola touched on before. There's going to be different reasons for different people. Minimising cost. This was Open Eco Homes, so burning less carbon is, I'm sure, a big motivation for many. And maximising self-consumption of solar energy for people who have solar PV arrays. It's often a sort of a bit of a point of honour to use as much as you can yourself and not send any back to the grid. And there's two sort of strategies you can take. For those of you who do have solar panels, then maximising the self-consumption of the energy that's generated from them is one approach to take. And the second is making use of time of use tariffs to decide on when you will use electricity or when you might store it. So approach number one, maximising PV self-consumption. Let's just sort of look at a few gadgets you can use, and let's sort of look at the trivial example first of just a very simple timer, because Solar is to some extent predictable. Sun comes up at a pretty exact hour in the morning and goes down at a pretty exact hour in the evening. So in the meantime, there might be some clouds, but even when it's cloudy, you get something useful from solar panels. So if you simply put your timer on to turn some of your loads on at noon, and you've got a 4 kilowatt solar array and the loads are maybe a kilowatt, there's a very good chance that most of the time those are going to be fully covered by the solar. So you don't really need to be very sophisticated. Even a simple timer will save you importing energy from the grid when you could be using cheap solar electricity. But it is pretty limited in what you could use this for, sort of washing and drying, possibly a dishwasher. Often, of course, these things will have timers built in. So if you just use them to turn on at appropriate time, then you should find you're using less energy if you've got solar at those times. Getting a bit more sophisticated now, and the immersion controller is something I'm sure many people who have solar panels will be aware of. They've been around for quite a long time now, so many of the solar installs that were done over the last 10 years would have an immersion controller in them. They're relatively cheap, a few £100s, and they just automatically divert any spare energy that would otherwise be going to the grid into an immersion element. In fact, they work with any resistive load, so any other heating element will normally work, but it's almost invariably the immersion element. They're very effective, they're relatively cheap. And actually, they're getting quite sophisticated these days. So that particular one I showed you, the Eddy, you can spend another 40 quid or so and buy a relay and sensor board, and that can make it into a quite sophisticated load controller. So in this example, the microcontroller is telling a heat pump to turn on when you have perhaps, say, 1.5 kilowatts of solar, which is enough to drive the heat pump. And that's obviously a lot more efficient at then getting the heat into your hot water tank or just into space heating than an immersion heater. So you're using that energy a lot more effectively. And you can also sort of switch the power so that when the immersion tank is full, rather than just that spare going back to the grid, you can stick it into a second buffer tank or underfloor heating coils or something like that. So yeah, you can do quite a lot with these devices now. The big one, of course, is the home battery, because here we're not just talking about shifting when we're using our load. We're actually talking about storing electricity at one point for use at another point. But there's quite a big balancing act when you're sizing your battery. And I'll just go through a few slides now, because here's a typical graph of generation over a course of a year. Day by day. So in the middle of the summer, we have very high peaks. In the middle of winter, very little. So this is sort of December, January time. And of course, there's day-to-day variability as well. So sunny days, you're getting the maximum. Cloudy days, you're only getting about a quarter or a third of much. If you actually look what happens over the course of a day now, obviously in the middle of the night, then there's nothing happening. This is a summer's day and the sun has come up. We've got this generation, there's probably a few clouds at this time. This is sunny time about at noon. And the green is where any surplus is going into charging the battery. And the red is then where it goes back to the grid. And in this example, by about 10 AM, the battery is already full. It's probably the case that the battery was full the previous day as well. You only used a few kilowatt hours, maybe 4 or 5 kilowatt hours overnight. So when that's charged back up again, the battery's full and the rest goes back to the grid. So in this case, it's a 10 kilowatt hour battery, this model, but actually only 5 kilowatt hours we were able to put in because that's all that was used overnight. On a winter day, you have the opposite problem. The scale of this is a bit different. So there's really not very much energy being produced at all. And a lot of it's actually just being used directly in the house. So 1.5 kilowatt hours is just going to the loads that are on in the house anyway. There's about just under a kilowatt hour spare to go to the battery in this case. So 1 kilowatt hour is not very much of a 10 kilowatt hour battery. We're only sort of using 10% of the capacity there. If you look at graphs of consumption, there's a bit of variation from the summer to winter, but it's the other way around this time. So we tend to use a little bit more energy in the winter just because the evenings are longer. We've got lights and things on. Perhaps a little bit of heating. Of course, if this was the house with a heat pump, you'd see dramatically higher usage in the winter compared to the summer. And there's a fair bit of variability from day to day, but less than in the generation. So we can see that in the summer, a lot of the consumption is being provided directly from the solar panels. That's this blue bit at the bottom. Some of it's being provided by the battery. In fact, almost all the rest of it in the summer is provided by the battery. So there's really virtually no import at all from the grid. But in the winter, most of the energy is being imported from the grid still. Again, just looking at individual days, on a summer day, when the sun comes up, you've sort of got this baseline of usage along the bottom, and as soon as the sun comes up, it's easily meeting all that and sending stuff back to the grid. When people turn the kettle on, you're actually using some energy from the battery because there isn't enough coming from the solar panel at that particular point. And in this example, there's no red at all, so there's no energy being used from the grid all day. Even in the middle of the night, the battery is discharging, and you don't require anything at all from the grid. So you can see here, over the course of the day, most of the energy was actually coming directly from the solar, but 3.5 kilowatt hours roughly coming from the battery. In the winter, trouble is there's not really much in the battery, so overnight the battery was completely empty. Sun came up and actually met all the sort of base loads. You can see these low-level loads here were all being met by the solar directly, and a little bit was going back to the battery. And then again, when the kettle sort of goes on or some load switches on, the battery is actually supplying those, and this is probably somebody cooking dinner or lunch or something at this point. But even those sort of spikes of use are enough to completely drain the battery as soon as the sun goes down, and then there's nothing left overnight. So sizing your battery is important, and in this particular example, the battery sort of gets used really well in the spring and autumn, which I haven't shown. You're actually sort of getting about 100% battery utilization on some days, because those are the days where there is enough to actually charge the battery fully during the day. And then there is enough usage in the evening and overnight to actually use all that power again. In the summer, you tend to use less utilization because you don't need as much energy. And in the winter, less because there's less solar around. I won't go into too much detail on this, but essentially there's diminishing returns with bigger batteries. If you look at your sort of import and export on this particular system without a battery, this house could be expected to import about 2,000 kilowatt hours a year. With a 5 kilowatt hour battery, easy to half that to less than 1,000 kilowatt hours a year. But up to 10 kilowatt hours, then your actual additional savings are only just 160 odd, 170 kilowatt hours, and even less for your third battery. So Samin was talking about having too small a battery, and that's true. If you had too small a battery, you wouldn't actually reduce your import very much. But if you have too big a battery, you're actually using it very effectively. So it's worth doing your sums if you're going for a battery bank. But they can sort of have your residual electricity bills fairly easily if you've got a decent size array and don't have too much consumption. They don't last forever, but the price is coming down. And of course, the price of electricity has been soaring lately. So I've not actually run the calculations lately. I'd have said until a year or two ago that the economics were pretty marginable, but they'll certainly be better at the moment than they were even a few weeks ago if the electricity prices stay high. It's just worth pointing out there's one more gadget you may want to make use of if you have an EV, an electric car, because you're going to need a charger anyway. And if you've got solar panels on your roof, you should really spend just a couple of £100 extra for a smart one that will again detect whether you've got any energy going back to the grid, and just use that to charge the car. So rather than sort of blasting in 7 kilowatts until it's full, it just sort of waits until there's enough solar energy and gradually sort of trickles it in so that you're not using anything from the grid. Although you can tell it that actually I need the car to be full at 7:30 next morning because I'm doing a long trip, and in that case it will try and use solar as much as possible, but then we'll top it up from the grid. So they are quite smart, a really good investment if you have solar and an EV. Let's just talk about approach number 2, which is time of use tariffs. And this is something that anyone can do, whether they've got solar or not. And you can make use of this because electricity wholesale prices vary really enormously. Electricity is cheap when demand is low. It tends to be overnight. If there's lots of energy available, and that's usually these days when the wind turbines are spinning around. And then it's very expensive when demand is high, essentially when people sort of travel home and start cooking. And if generation is low at those times, then the price can go really very high. And I'm sure you've all seen articles like this recently, where the wholesale prices have gone to really quite ridiculous levels. So £1,750 a megawatt hour. That's the same as £1.75 a kilowatt hour. You're buying your electricity from your electricity supplier, probably about 15-16 pence a kilowatt hour these days. So at the moment, at times, they're having to pay £1.75 for that electricity that they're selling to you at 16 or 17 pence. So it's no wonder they're all going pop at the moment. But this is, of course, exceptional. There's one company that, instead of just charging you a flat rate for your electricity, will charge you a rate that changes from hour to hour according to the wholesale price at the time. And this sort of just shows how it's intended to work on a typical day. So your standard variable tariff from the big 6 energy companies would be about here, 16 pence. You can shop around to get a rate maybe at 14 pence just on a flat tariff. But the Octopus Agile tariff will, most of the time, you would hope, be lower than the general price. But they'll charge you a lot more at the times when electricity prices are high. And as I say, that tends to be between sort of 4 and 7, but it will depend all on when the prices are, on what the demand is and on what the supply is. So if the wind turbines are spinning merrily, then that peak will be lower. If they're not, then it can be much higher. It's worth pointing out that at the moment, if they're charging you the wholesale price of electricity or a multiple of that, then they're somewhere way up here. So right now, Octopus Agile is not a very good buy, but hopefully that's a blip. Unfortunately, we'll probably see these standard tariffs go up significantly because they've obviously got to be above the wholesale price of electricity in general, or the electricity companies aren't making a living. So yeah, how to make the most of time of use tariffs. You want to sort of shift your demand as much as possible to the times when that electricity is cheap, and try not to use any at all when it's expensive. Even better, if you've got batteries, you can try and store energy at those cheap times and use it when the rates are high. So again, going back to the sort of very simple example, that's really how night storage heaters used to work. So back in the old days, we used to have sort of twin tariffs. The night rate would be quite significantly lower because, again, demand is lower then. So yeah, people would have night storage heaters to make use of that cheap nighttime electricity. There's absolutely no reason you couldn't use that with the Agile tariff and a simple controller to try and just switch on during those times when the electricity is cheap. Of course, pure electricity isn't a particularly efficient form of heating, so this isn't something I would particularly recommend. Batteries, we mentioned batteries, of course, for storing solar energy, but in fact, you can use them for storing cheap time of use tariff electricity as well. So there is an API, basically an interface that any computer that's connected online can talk to, that can see what the price of the wholesale, what the tariff price is going to be over the next 24 hours. And it's got an algorithm in it there that says, right, well, I need sort of this amount of energy in the morning when everyone wakes up and puts a shower on. So I need to charge at some point overnight to get those. When is the electricity going to be cheapest? So it'll try to store up when the energy is cheap, and it'll try and discharge again when the electricity prices are high. So again, that sort of late afternoon peak, you'd hope you've either filled the battery from your solar array by then, or if not, it will probably have switched on earlier to try and get enough to cover that little peak. There's another gadget called Cray, which is a sort of controller for other battery storage systems. So the Huawei battery storage systems can use it, and it can also actually work with compatible EV chargers. So it works a bit like the EV chargers I showed before, but using time of use tariffs to try and charge your vehicle at the time of it when it's cheap. And exactly as with the Give Energy system, it uses the Octopus API to look at when times the electricity is cheapest. And you can always just roll your own. All these devices I've talked about are based on very simple controllers. This is a Raspberry Pi Pico, which is about £4. There's loads of resources on the net to, if you wanted to. It's not actually terribly complicated to work out what you need to do to switch things on and off if you're good at computers or microcontrollers. I won't go into this because we're running short of time, but there are various payments you can get for sort of grid services that essentially support the grid at times of very high demand. And if you've got battery capacity available, then people will pay you 50 quid or 100 quid a year to have that battery ready to basically pump energy back into the grid to support it when you really need it. One thing to look for the future, vehicle to grid. So we've talked about smart chargers that are just putting energy into cars sitting on your drive. A vehicle to grid goes back the other way as well. So you've got a big battery sitting on your drive. Why not, if you don't need all that for driving, put that back into your house at the times when that electricity price is high and you don't want to be importing grid. And this is definitely something that's going to be coming along. There are various trials sort of going on at the moment. I'm not sure there's anything off the shelf where you can actually do this yet. And it does require a compatible car. But this, I'm sure, will become quite a big space in the future. So the summary, yeah, if you've got solar panels, then you can try and use that wisely by running appliances during the day when the sun's shining. And if you do have spare, then try and dump it into your immersion tank or charge your electric vehicle to use it most efficiently. If you actually want to sort of see yourself through the night, though, and really reduce the amount you're importing, then get a battery system, but do the calculations to try and size it well. And to the time of use tariffs can also work well with those battery systems, but you do need some sort of control system that's looking at the tariff and what it's doing over the next day to work out when to charge. And they may be able to control EV chargers or immersion controllers as well. So yeah, that's it from me. Let me just get back to
Thank you very much, Andy. That was brilliant. We have one more person who wanted to contribute but couldn't be here today, and that's Cray from the Transition Energy Group. He wanted to tell us about his homely controller for his heat pump. He's had a heat pump for some time, and the homely controller, which he now has, he installed it in January this year, is a way to sort of optimize the use of the heat pump based on a variable tariff like the Agile. This one is specifically geared to the Agile tariff. So this controller, it learns how long your home takes to heat up and cool down, looks at the weather forecasts, keeps an eye on the electricity prices, and makes sure your home is heated at the cheapest times throughout the day to meet your desired temperatures. And he says he's had no problem with it. So this is another way you can do it with, well, it's with a heat pump specifically. It's not completely all singing, all dancing, but it is off the shelf. So he says, in order to use this, you need to have a SMETS2 smart meter. You need an electricity tariff that is based on time of use, such as Octopus Agile. You need to sort of put the remote temperature node somewhere in your house and decide where is the best place for that. You need to tell the system what temperature spread it's allowed to give you a base from the set point. So, you know, how hot is it allowed to go? How cool is it allowed to go? And how you want to optimize it. And it works very nicely. And he says it also allows you to turn the heating off on warm days and run it for hot water only. And you can control it via an app. So I will put a couple of links in the chat referring to that. I'm sorry Nick can't be here today, but that is another possibility. So over to Mark now to organise the questions.
Thank you, Nicola. There's a smattering of questions been coming in. I've got one from and I can't remember, from Alston. Actually, it's very similar to the one you've just been answering. But if Alston would like to come forward and unmute yourself and have another look at this question of how you link with a heat pump.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks for the talks. I mean, this has been quite nice to hear that other people have been trying out different kinds of solutions. Now, the question I have is, I guess a few others have had it too, is how do you best pair solar and a battery with a heat pump? Now, heat pumps are expensive on electricity. So, would it be feasible, and it should be feasible, I think, but to charge a battery overnight using Agile or something, and during the day using your solar, and then you use that energy, not only that energy, but you rely on the battery to take a low energy rate and use that to drive your heat pump. Now, has anyone done this? And if so, what are the kinds of sizes of the battery and are they that they have used?
I can have a go at that if you like. Yeah, I mean, as Nicola was saying, that I think that the homely device just is meant to do exactly that. Sort of look at when the prices are best and try and run your heat pump at those times. There's only so much you can sort of shift when you want your heat pump to be on, of course. So there's two approaches there. You can turn your heat pump on and warm the house when the electricity is cheap or the sun's shining. And because there's a certain amount of thermal mass in your house, that will get you a fairway. And then you can, as you say, sort of charge a battery and try and run the heat pump from that time. The issue with that is you would need really quite a large battery because heat pumps still require a reasonable amount of electricity to run them. And of course, with solar, you have the problem that the time you want the energy from the heat pump tends to be completely the opposite to when the sun is available to fill that up. It's just completely the wrong time of the year. But it certainly can make a difference. But I don't think you could expect to have a system that really gave a very large proportion of your heating from solar to a heat pump.
But if it can be done, what size battery should we be targeting? I mean, I know it depends on the house, but just ballpark. Is it 5 kilowatt hours? Is it 10?
I think you'd be looking at sort of 10 kilowatt hours minimum. I mean, even a small heat pump is going to be taking 2 or 3 kilowatts. So it would only sort of run for 3 or 4 hours on a 10 kilowatt hour battery. So yeah, a 5 kilowatt hour battery really isn't going to get you very far at all. You'd be sort of looking at the 10 or 15.
Okay, thank you.
And the other problem is because the heat pumps work best when they're running in the background almost 24/7. The very low temperatures, so they're completely unseated. Just having a big pulse of electricity off a battery in a way. The two technologies, it goes well with a car, and much worse with a heat pump.
Yeah. But you could consider an air-to-air, so air conditioning, right? I mean, those would be much faster to heat a house for the evenings. Wouldn't that be the case?
Anyone?
Yeah, well, I mean, even air-to-air, you as Mark says, you're best to try and sort of run it continually at a low level. However, air conditioning, on the other hand, works extremely well with solar because you tend to need that at the times when the sun's shining. But that's more of a problem for other countries.
Yes, not for us.
Really an issue in this one.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a question that Jeff's asked of Samin. Do you want to come unmute yourself, Jeff? And
Jeff said he can't unmute. So I've got his message here. I'll read it out.
Fire away.
Samin, what do you use to switch between the various outputs? I guess you have a controller. Did that come with the PV or did you buy something else?
Everything. The title of my talk, Off the Shelf, kind of says it. So there are controllers in the. There's a controller in the in both the iBoost system and a controller in the PV and in the battery. They are set to certain values, so that determines the order in which things are done. And they can be changed, but I believe with the battery, I can't change it. The battery operators have to change that, so I don't have access to that. The others I can change, but right now it's set to what it is kind of an optimal use.
Okay, thanks for that. Catherine has a question about smart meters. Is Catherine still here with us? And would you like to unmute?
I am still here. This was just one we were wondering about in terms of getting a bit more resolution than half-hourly readings. We've only just moved to a smart meter, but we got so excited by the readings we were getting, we thought, well, can we go a bit more data heavy? Has anyone got something reading their own smart meters on a sort of instantaneous basis? The other thing we were thinking about doing was, does anyone run their freezer to a slightly lower temperature on cheap electricity, so they could be off on the expensive electricity?
I've seen various very low-tech things like having a Raspberry Pi and a camera literally reading your smart meter. Ideally, and then kind of getting that data out. Ideally, you want kind of the supplier should provide you with that kind of level of data. Really.
No, that's not so, Samin. Sorry. The way that the smart meters work, they report the half-hourly usage to a central company. Actually, well, they store the information half-hourly and report it to your supplier or the data access controller, which is a company that deals with the stuff, and it's all complicated. However, internally, they do keep track of it on a 10-second basis. And if you have something connected to your internal network, which I can't remember what the 3-letter acronym for is, then you can actually have something in your house which reports it on much more frequently on the 10 seconds.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hadn't finished my answer at that point.
Sorry.
But I was going to say, there are things like, I think I've seen something from Samsung, for instance, some smart home thing that will now hook up, they work with one of the energy or several of the energy companies, I don't know which ones. Anyway, there are things now, so there's very low-tech things I've seen, but now they are kind of, you can get that data off. But I think it really depends upon your supplier, which meter you have, various things like that. So I don't have that. We don't. I don't even have a smart meter at this point.
The 10-second reporting is a lot more accurate than counting the flashes on the meter. But you do have to go through the pain of getting it connected to your in-house network, which has lots of security things that you've got to jump through some things, because you don't want everybody going down the road and connecting to your electricity network system. So yeah, it's certainly possible, but I don't know offhand exactly what you can, which ones will work, but it is technically possible.
There are quite a lot of monitoring devices available, especially if you've got PV, where you just slip a current clamp around the PV cable, and then often another one around the main incoming exporting cable, and they'll generally put that data on a web portal for you to look at. So yeah, green energy options, EcoEye, Open Energy Monitor is one you can build yourself. So there's loads of options where you can get really good monitoring data out as well from these devices.
And I think, Catherine, reading the, I think what Andy says about essentially putting clamps on yourself and reading that, then you get it per device. Reading the smart data, if you have several things running all the time, then you won't be able to tell the difference between them. It depending on the kind of, the level of data you want, the granularity of data you want.
A simple current clamp only records current. To get an accuracy on the power that you're consuming, they have to record the voltage as well. So the very old ones, the simple current clamp and nothing else, are absolutely useless. Well, they're not useless, but they're not very good. But if you want accuracy, you need to have one that actually looks at the voltage as well, which most of them do now. But it is not just a current clamp.
Catherine asked specifically about turning off your freezer in the peak hours. Is there anything that will do that other than a timer?
I'm not aware of any, I have to say. I've certainly heard of it suggested as a good idea, and it certainly is a good idea because, yeah, there's quite a lot of thermal mass there that is not going to suddenly warm up, and you can turn it off for a couple of hours without a problem. I'm not aware of anything.
And if you think something like if you had a smart plug and you could send it, you could send it commands, so it could turn on and off, right? Depending on what's happening outside in the environment.
Okay, so work in progress, maybe.
There are bits around, yes.
Brian's asking a question to Andy about time of use tariffs. Brian, can you unmute and fire away?
Yeah, I can unmute. I can't get my video to work, but thank you very much. Yes, I probably just missed the names of the time of use tariff equipment that Andy mentioned, and I'd be quite interested just to take a note of it if I could, please.
Yeah. So, sorry, my
video is working.
Getting some echo there. The two I mentioned are give energy.
Feedback, Andy.
Sorry. Is that any better? I don't know about your speaker going back through your microphone. Is that any better? Yeah, great.
That's better, yeah.
Yeah, so the two I mentioned were give energy. So they're a battery and also a PV inverter manufacturer. So the battery system will work with your solar and try and use that efficiently, but it can also talk to the Optimus Agile API and do storage based on the time of use as well. And it's got an algorithm in it. I've never looked into exact detail of how it makes the decisions about when to charge, but presumably it tries to learn how much energy you're using at different times of day and make sure there's enough available within the battery to meet those times at the most cost-effective manner. The other one is called Tribe, and it works. It's really just a controller. It's a sort of small box with a microcontroller in it, and it is meant to work with a bunch of different compatible things. So I dare say if somebody built a freezer that would talk to Tribe, they'd be delighted. At the moment, the things that will work with it are Huawei battery storage systems. So again, Huawei do PV inverters and battery storage. There's a sort of a standard protocol for electric car charger communication and control. So if there's car chargers that are built to that specification, then it could control those. But I think they're hoping that there'll be a sort of whole ecosystem of products that are built to work with it. So yes, you could have your washing machine and your freezer all connected to it, and it would work smoothly with everything. At the moment, it's sort of EV and battery storage. So that was Tribe.
Okay, Peter.
Looking at the chat, quite a lot of you have already got lots of monitoring going on. Are any of you actually using that to control things? If so, say in the chat, and we'll ask you to speak and tell us about what you're doing. That would be really interesting. But having said that, we're running out of time. So unless you want to keep going a little bit longer.
Just Peter Pope's comment about Henry Levin's comment. Would you like to come on online, Peter, and make it?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. This is a bit provocative, I know. Question for you, Andy. Your PV array is 15 kilowatts. Marie Lovins of the Rocky Mountain Institute lives off-grid with a capacity of 300 watts. Which is more environmentally friendly?
They are, I'm sure, completely. I lived on my narrowboat with about 300 watts of solar for many years, and it was fantastic. I think the answer is, well, I don't know actually. The fact is our 15 kilowatt solar array actually exports most of the energy it produces back to the grid. So we're actually reducing other people's carbon use by putting that energy back to the grid so that other people can use it. And of course, if you're off grid, then you can't do that. So actually, I would say that in general, being grid connected, if you can be, makes far more sense and is far more energy efficient. You need much smaller battery storage systems than being off grid. But I fully agree that living in a small way and making minimum use of resources is a very good way of life as well.
Thank you.
And there's, I think, is that all the questions, Mark, or is that there's one more from Anne?
Yeah, let's fire away with Anne. Always good to hear from Anne.
Hi, Andy. I was interested in using a sun amp. We haven't got PV, so would it make sense to have a sun amp thermal phase change storage system charged up by off-peak electricity overnight, and then used for domestic hot water and possibly central heating as a way of getting off gas?
Yeah, I mean, a sun amp is in a way no different to any other hot water store. It has an immersion heater in it, and you put in cold water at one end and you get hot water out. It is more efficient at storing the heat in terms of being able to do more storage in a smaller space and losing less through poor insulation on the outside of it. But fundamentally, it's no different to that. And you certainly could control a sun amp as you can with a PV diverter. I mean, that's what I do in my house. Try and charge it off the PV, but you could equally turn on that immersion when the electricity is cheap, using some sort of controller that's looking at the Optimus Agile API or another time of use tariff.
Would you like to explain to people what a sun amp is?
Yeah, so a sun amp is it's an alternative to a conventional hot water cylinder. It's a big box filled with a waxy substance that melts at 55 degrees, which is about the temperature you want your hot water at. And if you can think back to your sort of GCSE level chemistry and physics, as you melt a substance, it releases a huge amount of heat. Imagine that sort of glass of water with ice in it. It stays at 0 degrees all the time that the ice is melting. And it's really exactly the same thing, but at 55 degrees, the box is sort of releasing all that heat. So the one I've got holds about 9 kilowatt hours of heat, but fits underneath a kitchen counter. So it's about about a third the size, I guess, of the equivalent hot water cylinder. And they're very easy to use because you don't have to have mains pressure in the thing itself. You just have a heat exchange coil that's going through this waxy substance here. You just put cold water in at the bottom, hot water comes out the top. But in terms of actually heating them, it's really no different to a hot water tank. You can just have an immersion coil, and that's all I have in mind. It's just running from the PV when there's spare solar energy available. Or there's actually 2 heat exchange coils inside, and you can plumb one to a heat pump or even to a gas boiler. Any source of heat you can run through it to warm it back up and refill it. So yeah, it's essentially just a very efficient form of hot water storage. I should perhaps say that it's probably not practical to use it much for space heating, because your space heating demands are likely to be in the sort of many tens of kilowatt hours a day. And it will soon get very expensive buying these devices. It's good for domestic hot water, and people have used them for space heating, but you do need to really invest quite heavily in the boxes.
Thanks, Andy. It is actually 8:30 now, and I need to say what I'm supposed to say. So thank you ever so much. I hope you've enjoyed the talk and found it very informative. If you haven't already done so, could you consider giving Open Eco Homes or giving Cambridge Carbon Footprint a donation? because we do need money to keep going and to keep advertising these talks and stuff like that. And also, if we would love for you to fill in this feedback form in order to tell us how to improve the sessions, which I will also give you the link. That would be absolutely super. Andy and Samin, are you able to hang on for a little bit longer if people do want to ask questions? Are there any more questions?
Yeah. There's the raise hand facility on reactions you could use if you wanted.
There's something else from Jeff. Oh no, that was to me. Right, so he sent it to me, so you can't see it. Jeff says, with respect to monitoring, there was a company with a research presence in Cambridge, Informasis. They were aiming to provide fine-grained info about energy use from smart meters. Not sure if that happened or not. Actually, I think it did, and I think I saw something about them recently. They had a really interesting setup where they have something akin to it. You know, it is a current clamp, but and voltage, and it's very, very fine grained, and they could distinguish the different appliances that you turned on and off by their starting and stopping sort of, you know, key little signatures. And so they have much more power to do what we call disaggregation, where you could take the aggregate electricity supply and then decide which appliances are using it. I'm sure I saw something about it recently, but I think they're mainly looking at using this device to monitor what people are doing in the home, to sort of look after people who are elderly or frail, and you can tell if they're sort of getting up and using the kettle in the middle of the night and that sort of thing. I did, so they are definitely still going. I'm just not sure that they're in this sort of space. Oh yes, the final slides. I'm supposed to screen share the final slides. Sorry, Tom, or whoever it was told me that. I will screen share. At least I will if I can find the slides. Hang on. Sorry. That one. Here we are. Right. Do you want to see this full screen? There is the final slides, which has the links as well. And there's more stuff. There are some further resources on Open EcoHome's website. Can you see my screen? Good. Yeah. Lots of information. Find out how you can get started with your retrofit. That's another talk coming up. Look at the case studies from the other homes. You can borrow a thermal imaging camera and get training. There's training sessions. I think the dates have been agreed now, so they must be on the website. Use this personalized home energy advice tool, which is a sort of interesting, kind of like a checklist, but you can sort of customize it to your house, which is really interesting. And oh, I don't know about this one. Take political action, e.g. households declare. That sounds interesting. So that's more stuff you can do. Thank you all for coming.